The morning of October 12, 2007, arrived with a crisp autumn chill in Willowdale, Indiana, a quiet town of roughly 7,000 residents tucked along the winding banks of the White River. Maple and oak trees lined the residential streets, their leaves shifting from green to fiery shades of orange and crimson. Children hurried along sidewalks with backpacks bouncing, their laughter mixing with the distant hum of school buses. 9-year-old Amelia Foster stepped out of her family's 2-story brick home on Sycamore Lane just after 7:45 a.m. Her dark ponytail swung as she adjusted the straps of her navy blue backpack. She wore a light purple jacket over a white shirt printed with tiny glowing stars, jeans, and the new sneakers her parents had bought her for the new school year, white with silver accents that caught the sunlight. Amelia turned and waved at her mother, Elena Foster, who stood in the open doorway holding a mug of coffee. Elena waved back with a smile, watching until her daughter rounded the corner toward Maple Avenue. It was a routine they had repeated hundreds of times since Amelia started 4th grade at Willow Creek Elementary. Elena never imagined that this ordinary Friday morning would be the last time she would see her daughter disappear around that familiar bend. Amelia was a bright, imaginative child with wide hazel eyes and an endless curiosity about the night sky. She could name dozens of constellations by heart and often carried a small notebook filled with sketches of planets and galaxies. Her bedroom ceiling was covered with glow-in-the-dark stars carefully arranged to match the real constellations visible from their backyard. Every clear evening, she begged to stay up a little later to use the telescope her father had assembled the previous Christmas. At Willow Creek Elementary, Amelia's teacher, Mr. Daniel Reynolds, often found himself fielding her questions about black holes, supernovas, and whether aliens might exist on distant moons. He later described her as the kind of student who made teaching rewarding, always eager, always raising her hand with a new fact she had read in one of her library books about space. School that Friday ended at 3 p.m. sharp. Amelia gathered her books, said goodbye to her friends in the hallway, and headed out the main doors with the rest of the 4th graders. The walk home was only 7 blocks, a route she had taken alone since the beginning of the school year. Her parents had drilled the rules into her: stick to the sidewalk, look both ways at crossings, and come straight home unless she had permission to stop somewhere. The Foster family had moved to Willowdale 4 years earlier when Amelia's father, Thomas, accepted a senior accountant position at a manufacturing firm in nearby Indianapolis. The commute was manageable, and the town offered the kind of safe, close-knit environment they wanted for raising their only child. Elena worked part-time as an English teacher at the middle school, which meant her schedule aligned well with Amelia's. She was almost always home by the time her daughter arrived. Willowdale had the relaxed charm of many Midwestern small towns. Founded in the late 1880s as a river trading post, it had grown slowly into a bedroom community for families working in Indianapolis or the surrounding counties. The downtown area still featured a historic red brick courthouse square, a family-owned diner famous for its homemade pies, and a small public library where Amelia spent many Saturday afternoons browsing the astronomy section. Willow Creek Elementary sat on 10 acres at the eastern edge of town. Built in 1972, the single-story building housed just over 300 students from kindergarten through 5th grade. Its grounds included playgrounds, a soccer field, and a community garden where classes planted vegetables each spring. Principal Margaret Hayes had led the school for 9 years and made it a point to greet students by name each morning. She remembered Amelia as polite and enthusiastic, the girl who volunteered to help set up the portable planetarium during Science Week. At 3:15 p.m., Elena glanced at the kitchen clock while preparing an after-school snack: apple slices and peanut butter, Amelia's favorite. By 3:25 p.m., she moved to the living room window overlooking Sycamore Lane. A few neighborhood children passed by, swinging lunchboxes and chatting, but there was no sign of Amelia's purple jacket or bouncing ponytail. Elena told herself not to worry yet. Sometimes Amelia walked with her friend Clara from 2 streets over, which could add a few minutes. But by 3:35 p.m., the street remained empty of her daughter's familiar figure. A quiet unease settled in Elena's chest. She stepped onto the front porch, scanning both directions. Still nothing. Amelia was responsible. She knew the rules and followed them. If she wanted to stop at the corner store for a piece of candy with her weekly allowance, she always asked first, or called from the school office. Elena went back inside and dialed the school. The office secretary, Mrs. Bennett, who had worked there for nearly 2 decades, checked the attendance records and dismissal log. Amelia had been present all day and had left with the regular group at 3 p.m. No one had signed her out early. Next, Elena called the parents of Amelia's closest friends. She reached Clara's mother first. Clara had walked partway with Amelia as usual, but they had parted at the intersection of Maple and Birch Avenues, just 2 blocks from the Foster home. Clara had continued on her own route and arrived home on time. She hadn't noticed anything unusual. Similar conversations with 2 other classmates' parents yielded the same result. No one had seen Amelia after she left the school grounds. Elena's concern sharpened into real worry. At 3:50 p.m., she called Thomas at his office downtown. He was in the middle of reviewing quarterly reports, but immediately set everything aside when he heard the tension in his wife's voice. He told his assistant he had a family emergency and left the building, making the 25-minute drive home in just under 18 minutes. Thomas arrived at 4:08 p.m. and immediately began driving Amelia's route, moving slowly and checking side streets, alleys, and the small park where children sometimes lingered. He stopped at the Sunny Corner Market, a neighborhood staple where Amelia occasionally bought star-shaped stickers or a small treat. The owner, Mr. Patel, knew Amelia well, but shook his head. He hadn't seen her that afternoon. The store's single security camera had been out of order for weeks. While Thomas searched by car, Elena walked the neighborhood on foot, knocking on doors and asking neighbors if they had noticed Amelia passing by. Most residents were just returning from work or errands and were happy to help. Mrs. Langford, a retired nurse who spent afternoons tending her rose garden, said she had seen Amelia walk past around 3:12 p.m. She remembered because Amelia had paused to comment on how pretty the roses looked that day. Amelia had seemed perfectly normal, cheerful, walking at her usual pace. That sighting placed Amelia just 1 block from home. She should have reached the front door by 3:15 p.m. at the latest. Those missing minutes between Mrs. Langford's garden and the Foster porch began to loom large. By 4:30 p.m., Thomas and Elena had gathered 9 neighbors willing to help search. They divided into small groups, checking the community park, the wooded path behind the elementary school, where kids sometimes hunted for interesting rocks, and even the shallow section of the White River, where children occasionally skipped stones. They looked in unlocked garages, backyard sheds, and any place a curious 9-year-old might explore. Several neighbors offered to have their basements and attics searched as well, understanding the urgency. As the clock approached 5 p.m. and daylight began to fade, the reality settled in. Amelia was not simply late or distracted. Something had interrupted her short journey home. Thomas made the call to the Willowdale Police Department at 5:02 p.m. The dispatcher, Officer Ramirez, took down the essential details calmly and efficiently. Amelia's description, what she had been wearing, the exact time she was last seen, and confirmation that she had no known medical conditions or reason to run away. Chief Robert Ellison arrived at the Foster home at 5:19 p.m., accompanied by Sergeant Karen Whitlock, a 15-year veteran who had handled several missing child reports over the years. Chief Ellison, 51 and known for his steady demeanor, treated the case seriously from the start. Though most missing children in Willowdale turned up within hours, lost in a friend's backyard or delayed by an innocent detour, he knew that quick action was critical. The initial interview took place in the Fosters' living room, surrounded by reminders of Amelia, her latest drawing of the Orion Nebula taped to the refrigerator, her telescope visible through the sliding glass door, her backpack hook empty by the entrance. Chief Ellison asked about Amelia's habits, personality, and any recent changes in behavior. Both parents emphasized that she was reliable and rule-abiding, unlikely to wander off without telling someone. While the chief gathered information, Sergeant Whitlock began coordinating the formal search. Department protocol for children under 12 required immediate mobilization. Within 30 minutes, 5 additional officers arrived, along with the first wave of concerned neighbors who had heard through word of mouth. The organized search began at 5:45 p.m., just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Teams were assigned to different sections of town, starting with the most likely areas along Amelia's route. Flashlights swept across lawns, alleyways, and drainage ditches. The K-9 unit arrived at 6:20 p.m. with Tracker, a bloodhound experienced in missing person cases. Given one of Amelia's jackets for scent, the dog picked up her trail immediately from the school exit, following it along the sidewalk past Mrs. Langford's house. But near the corner of Maple and Birch, the same spot where Clara had last seen her, the trail abruptly ended. That intersection featured a small cluster of businesses, a coffee shop, a used bookstore, and a vacant storefront that had sat empty for months. Each location was checked thoroughly, inside and out. No trace of Amelia turned up. As night fully settled, the search expanded. Nearby police departments were alerted. Volunteers continued to arrive, bringing extra flashlights and thermos bottles of coffee. The local fire station offered floodlights and additional manpower. Elena refused to leave the command post that had been set up in the elementary school parking lot. She sat in a folding chair, clutching Amelia's favorite stuffed animal, a plush gray alien with big black eyes that Amelia had named Zeta. Every time a search team returned or a radio crackled, Elena looked up, hoping for news. Thomas coordinated with incoming volunteers while keeping in touch with extended family. Amelia's grandparents in Michigan immediately began the long drive south. Elena's brother in Chicago booked the earliest flight he could find. The first night passed without answers. Searchers combed every street, park, and empty lot in Willowdale. By midnight, more than 50 people were actively involved, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like thin threads of hope. As the hours stretched on, the quiet suburban streets that had always felt so safe took on an unfamiliar edge. Somewhere in those 7 familiar blocks, 9-year-old Amelia Foster had vanished without a trace. Dawn broke slowly over Willowdale on October 13, 2007, painting the sky in pale grays and pinks. The command post in the elementary school parking lot had never fully shut down. A skeleton crew of officers and dedicated volunteers had kept watch through the night, patrolling streets and monitoring the tip line. By 5:30 a.m., fresh teams began arriving, fortified with coffee from the diner that had reopened early just for the searchers. Chief Robert Ellison briefed the early shift as the sun cleared the horizon. Overnight patrols had turned up nothing. No new sightings, no abandoned items, no suspicious vehicles. The town remained quiet, almost unnaturally so, as if holding its breath. At 6 a.m., state police helicopters thundered overhead, beginning systematic grid searches of the farmland and wooded areas surrounding Willowdale. Their thermal imaging equipment scanned for any heat signatures that might indicate a lost or hidden child. Ground teams fanned out again, revisiting sections from the previous evening with fresh eyes and daylight advantage. Dive teams launched small boats on the deeper pools of the White River and several farm ponds within a 5-mile radius. They moved methodically, dragging grapples and using side-scan sonar borrowed from a neighboring county. Volunteers on foot combed the riverbanks, probing tall grass and underbrush. Elena and Thomas Foster had managed only fitful rest in the school gymnasium. They returned to the command post as activity ramped up. Elena's face was drawn from lack of sleep, but she insisted on staying updated on every development. Thomas helped distribute new flyers featuring Amelia's photograph and description, now printed in the thousands overnight by a local copy shop. At 7:30 a.m., Special Agent Laura Bennett arrived from WAD, the FBI's Indianapolis field office, accompanied by 2 evidence technicians and a victim specialist. She met immediately with Chief Ellison and Sergeant Whitlock, reviewing the full timeline and overnight logs. Agent Bennett, calm and focused, emphasized the need for a layered approach, continued searches combined with investigative interviews and evidence collection. Her first priority was the intersection of Maple and Birch Avenues. Technicians cordoned off the area with yellow tape, photographing tire impressions in the soft shoulder and collecting trace samples from the curb. A canvas team went door to door again along the route, this time armed with printed timelines to jog memories. By 8:15 a.m., a new witness came forward, a postal carrier who had been on her route the previous afternoon. She remembered seeing Amelia walking past the post office around 3:08 p.m., humming to herself. The carrier had waved, and Amelia had waved back. She hadn't noticed any vehicles lingering or anyone approaching the girl. The statement reinforced the timeline but offered no breakthrough. Media coverage intensified throughout the morning. Local television vans parked along the school perimeter, broadcasting live updates. Amelia's school photo filled screens across central Indiana, accompanied by pleas from Chief Ellison for anyone with information to come forward. The national wire services picked up the story by 9 a.m., ensuring it would reach evening newscasts farther afield. Agent Bennett established a dedicated interview room inside the school library. She began with re-interviews of the parents, conducted separately and gently. Both Elena and Thomas cooperated fully, answering questions about family routines, recent visitors, and any strangers Amelia might have mentioned. They voluntarily agreed to polygraph examinations later in the day if needed. School staff were next. Principal Margaret Hayes opened the building fully for investigators, teachers, and custodians gathered in the cafeteria, waiting their turns. Mr. Reynolds, Amelia's teacher, provided details about her academic performance. She was reading above grade level and had recently completed a project on the solar system. And her social interactions. No behavioral changes, no conflicts, no unusual notes home. The head custodian, Mr. Vargas, confirmed seeing Amelia leave at dismissal through the main doors. Limited security footage from the school's 2 cameras showed her exiting normally at 3:01 p.m., backpack swinging, chatting briefly with Clara before they parted ways. Route businesses received renewed attention. The coffee shop owner reviewed his credit card receipts from Friday afternoon, identifying regular customers who might have been present. The bookstore provided a list of purchases timed between 3:00 and 3:30 p.m. None of the names raised immediate flags. By noon, the tip line had logged over 40 calls. Most were mistaken sightings, children who resembled Amelia from a distance, but each required follow-up. 2 officers were assigned full-time to triage and dispatch patrol units for verification. A promising lead emerged at 1:20 p.m. A gas station attendant 10 miles north reported a man purchasing fuel around 4 p.m. Friday with a child in his passenger seat who appeared upset. Surveillance footage was requested immediately. Patrol cars converged on the station while technicians prepared to analyze the recording. Community support remained strong. Churches canceled regular services to host prayer vigils. The diner served free meals to searchers. Blue ribbons, Amelia's favorite color, began appearing on mailboxes and storefronts as a silent show of solidarity. Agent Bennett expanded the investigative circle. Background checks started on all registered sex offenders within a 50-mile radius. The list numbered 15 individuals, each to be located and interviewed about their whereabouts on October 12th. One name drew early attention: Ronald Hayes, 46, with prior convictions from the 1990s, living 20 miles away in a rural mobile home. His probation officer confirmed he had checked in on October 11th but had no verification for the following day. A surveillance team was dispatched discreetly. As afternoon turned to evening again, the second full day of searching drew to a close with no major discoveries. Helicopters returned to base as light faded. Dive teams packed equipment after clearing all assigned water sites. Ground teams covered an additional 5 square miles of fields and woods. The command post settled into a new rhythm, less frantic than the first night, more structured. Investigators worked late into the evening, building files and timelines. Volunteers rotated through shifts, determined to maintain momentum. Elena and Thomas met briefly with Agent Bennett at 8 p.m. She updated them honestly. The evidence pointed toward abduction rather than accident, but every resource was now engaged. The FBI's involvement meant access to national databases and behavioral analysts specializing in child predator patterns. The town of Willowdale prepared for another long night. Streetlights cast long shadows over empty sidewalks where children usually played. The search had evolved from desperate hope into sustained determination, driven by the knowledge that time remained critical. Yet, as darkness fell once more, Amelia Foster was still missing, and the questions surrounding her disappearance grew only deeper. The days following Amelia Foster's disappearance blurred into a relentless rhythm of searches, interviews, and waiting. By the end of the first week, the initial surge of volunteers had settled into a steady core of dedicated helpers, while the investigation itself grew broader and more methodical under FBI guidance. Special Agent Laura Bennett divided the work into expanding circles. The innermost circle, family, close friends, and school contacts, had already been thoroughly examined. Elena and Thomas passed voluntary polygraph tests with no signs of deception. Extended relatives, including those who had arrived from out of state, provided alibis that checked out quickly. No domestic issues, no financial desperation, no hidden conflicts emerged. Attention shifted outward to everyone who had regular access to Amelia's daily world. Willow Creek Elementary employed 41 staff members, from teachers to cafeteria workers. Each underwent background checks and individual interviews. Mr. Vargas, the head custodian, described his routine on October 12th. He had been repairing a leaky faucet in the third-grade wing during dismissal and had noticed Amelia leaving with the usual crowd. The school's limited camera footage supported his account, nothing unusual. Bus drivers who serviced nearby routes were questioned. The mail carrier who had seen Amelia was re-interviewed for any additional details she might have recalled. Delivery drivers active in the neighborhood that afternoon provided statements. None offered a clear view of the critical minutes after 3:12 p.m. Agent Bennett's team scrutinized every business along the 7-block route. The Sunny Corner Market's outdated cash register produced paper receipts, but none indicated purchases by Amelia that day. The pharmacy owner, who knew the Fosters from regular prescriptions, confirmed her staff had been busy with a late afternoon rush and had seen no children lingering outside. The used bookstore yielded a small but useful detail. A customer, browsing near the front window around 3:15 p.m., remembered glancing out and seeing a girl in a purple jacket walking past. She had not noticed the girl stop or speak to anyone, and no vehicle had pulled up at the curb in her line of sight. By October 19th, the tip line had received more than 200 calls. Investigators categorized them by credibility and urgency. Most involved children spotted in distant towns, who, upon verification, turned out to be local kids with similar clothing or hair color. A handful required travel. Agents drove to Terre Haute and Bloomington to check reports of a girl matching Amelia's description at shopping centers. Each lead dissolved under scrutiny. One report stood out briefly. A truck driver refueling on Interstate 70 around 5 p.m. on October 12th claimed he had seen a man leading a crying child toward a dark van in the rest area parking lot. The description of the child was close enough to send a team racing to review security footage. The grainy recording showed several families and travelers, but no scene matching the driver's account. Follow-up questioning revealed the driver had worked a double shift and conceded he might have confused dates. Media attention peaked during the second week. National morning shows ran segments featuring Amelia's photograph alongside interviews with Chief Ellison and Agent Bennett. Elena appeared on one program via satellite from Willowdale, speaking calmly about her daughter's love of astronomy and asking anyone with information to come forward. The broadcast generated another wave of calls, none of which panned out. The registered offender list produced its first person of interest. Ronald Hayes, no relation to the school principal, lived in a rural area 22 miles northeast. His record dated back 15 years, and he was no longer on probation, but his proximity and history flagged him for immediate attention. Surveillance observed him going to and from a warehouse job in shifts that left his afternoon hours unaccounted for on October 12th. When interviewed at his home, Hayes claimed he had been running errands in town and then napping before his evening shift. Neighbors could confirm seeing his truck parked outside around 4 p.m., but no one had actually seen him during the critical window. A search of his property, conducted with a warrant, turned up no evidence linking him to Amelia. No clothing fibers, no items belonging to a child, no maps or photographs. Hayes agreed to a polygraph. Results were inconclusive, elevated stress on questions about children and vehicles, but not definitive deception. He remained under loose surveillance while the investigation continued. As October gave way to November, seasonal changes deepened the sense of time passing. Leaves finished falling, leaving trees bare against gray skies. Overnight temperatures dropped below freezing. Searches shifted focus to areas less affected by weather, abandoned barns, storage units, and secluded gravel roads where someone might conceal evidence. The community refused to let momentum fade. Blue ribbons stayed tied to porch rails and lampposts. A reward fund, started by local businesses and boosted by anonymous donations, reached $24,000. Vigil gatherings moved indoors to the community center as evenings grew colder. Agent Bennett maintained daily briefings at the command post, now relocated to a larger room inside the police station. Case files filled cabinets, witness statements, tip logs, laboratory reports on trace evidence collected from the intersection. Technicians had identified several tire tread patterns in the soft dirt near the curb, but all matched common brands owned by dozens of residents. Forensic analysis of Amelia's backpack hook at home and her bedroom yielded nothing foreign, no unfamiliar hairs or fibers suggesting prior contact with a stranger. Behavioral analysts from the FBI's Indianapolis office reviewed the known facts and produced a preliminary profile: opportunistic offender, likely local or familiar with the area, operating in daylight with low risk of witnesses. Thanksgiving approached, bringing a painful milestone. The Fosters had always hosted a large family meal, with Amelia helping set the table and insisting on saying what she was thankful for, usually something about seeing a new constellation. This year the house stayed quiet. Relatives came anyway, bringing food no one had energy to cook, sitting together in the living room surrounded by Amelia's drawings and telescope. December arrived with the first snow. Outdoor searches became limited to accessible roads and structures. Ground-penetrating radar teams examined several sites flagged by cadaver dogs during earlier sweeps, but results were negative. The first anniversary, October 12, 2008, brought renewed media interest. Cable programs devoted episodes to Amelia's case, airing age-progressed images created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Elena and Thomas spoke at a candlelight vigil attended by hundreds. The crowd stood in silence under a clear night sky filled with stars, many thinking of the little girl who had loved them. Tips surged again after the anniversary coverage, then gradually tapered off. By the end of the second year, active ground searches had largely ceased. The case file remained open, reviewed monthly by Agent Bennett and Chief Ellison. New leads were followed whenever they appeared, but months passed between meaningful developments. Willowdale changed, in subtle ways. Parents accompanied younger children on walks that once felt perfectly safe. The school added security cameras at additional exits. Community watch groups formed, patrolling neighborhoods in the evenings. The Fosters adapted as best they could. Thomas returned to work full-time, though his focus often drifted. Elena took an extended leave from teaching, volunteering instead at the library to stay busy. They attended support groups for families of missing children, finding quiet understanding among others who knew the unique weight of unresolved loss. Years accumulated. Amelia's bedroom stayed much as she had left it, glow-in-the-dark stars still on the ceiling, telescope by the window, astronomy books on the shelf. The blue ribbons faded but were replaced when needed. Investigators applied emerging techniques whenever possible. DNA databases expanded, allowing retesting of trace samples collected in 2007. Nothing matched unknown profiles. Age-progressed images were updated and redistributed annually. By 2015, 8 years after the disappearance, the command post had long since disbanded. The case lived primarily in file boxes and digital records, tended by a smaller team. Agent Bennett had moved to a supervisory role, but continued overseeing Amelia's file personally. Willowdale carried on, growing slightly with new families moving in, unaware of the shadow that lingered for those who remembered October 12, 2007. The town's sense of safety had been altered forever, yet the determination to find answers endured quietly, waiting for the development that might finally bring the truth to light. The calendar pages turned slowly after the second anniversary, and Willowdale settled into a new kind of normal. Amelia Foster's disappearance was no longer breaking news, but it never became old news either. The case file stayed active, tended by a smaller circle of investigators who refused to let it gather dust. Special Agent Laura Bennett, now supervising a regional task force, continued to review Amelia's file every quarter. New tips, fewer each year, were still followed promptly. Age-progressed images were updated in 2010, showing what Amelia might look like at age 12, then again in 2013 at 15. The images were distributed to law enforcement agencies nationwide and posted on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website. Outdoor searches became seasonal events. Each spring, when snow melted and underbrush thinned, volunteer teams coordinated by the Indiana Search and Rescue Council revisited remote areas. Abandoned quarries, dense woods along the river, overgrown lots on the edge of town. Cadaver dogs worked grids identified from earlier aerial surveys. Ground-penetrating radar scanned suspicious depressions in the soil. Nothing connected to Amelia ever surfaced. The Fosters adapted in quiet ways. Thomas transferred to a closer office in Indianapolis to shorten his commute and be home more reliably. Elena returned to teaching part-time at the middle school, finding that working with students kept her grounded. They attended annual remembrance events together, standing side by side as candles were lit and names read aloud. Their marriage endured strain but held. Counseling sessions helped them navigate the unique grief of not knowing. They spoke openly with therapists about the anger, the guilt, the endless what-ifs, yet they chose not to let the uncertainty define every part of their lives. Amelia's bedroom remained untouched for several years, then gradually shifted. Her books stayed on the shelves, but the glow-in-the-dark stars were carefully removed when the ceiling needed repainting. The telescope found a permanent spot in the living room, pointed toward the backyard where Amelia used to watch meteor showers. Community support evolved too. The initial meal trains and fundraisers gave way to enduring traditions. Every October 12th, the town held a short ceremony at the community center. Blue ribbons were retied on trees along Amelia's walking route. The reward fund, now at $31,000, remained active under the management of a local nonprofit. In 2011, a national cold case initiative allowed Agent Bennett to submit trace evidence for advanced DNA analysis. Techniques unavailable in 2007 could now detect smaller genetic samples. Fibers from the intersection curb and soil from tire impressions were retested. Results identified only environmental material and DNA from known searchers who had contaminated the scene in the early days. No unknown profile emerged. 2 years later, a multi-state tip line linked to a similar disappearance in Kentucky prompted comparison of cases. Behavioral analysts examined patterns. Both children taken in daylight on routine walks, both in small towns, both with abrupt loss of scent trails. Differences in age and physical description ultimately ruled out a connection, but the exercise reinforced the profile of an opportunistic offender familiar with local routines. By 2014, Willowdale had installed new security cameras at key intersections, funded partly by grants inspired by Amelia's case. Schools implemented stricter visitor protocols and buddy walk programs for younger students. Parents who once let children roam freely now drove them door to door. The changes were subtle, accepted as the price of heightened awareness. The Fosters marked milestones privately. On what would have been Amelia's 13th birthday, they released blue balloons at the riverbank. At 15, they donated a high-quality telescope to the elementary school science lab in her name. A small plaque beside it read, "For looking at the stars and wondering, Amelia Foster." In 2015, a documentary series on unsolved missing children cases featured Amelia's story. The episode brought a brief surge of online attention and a handful of new tips. Investigators chased each one, a reported sighting in Florida, a possible match in a Colorado yearbook photo, but all led nowhere. In the spring of 2016, 9 years after Amelia Foster vanished, construction crews began renovating an abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of Harrison, a town 14 miles northwest of Willowdale. The brick complex had stood empty since 2006, its windows boarded and its grounds overgrown with weeds. A developer had purchased the property the previous year with plans to convert it into loft apartments and small commercial spaces. On April 18th, workers jackhammering the basement floor to install new drainage lines struck something unexpected. Embedded roughly 18 inches beneath the old concrete slab lay a small silver charm bracelet, its delicate chain tangled but intact. Among the charms was a distinctive enamel star, blue with a tiny crystal in the center. The bracelet had been protected from the elements by the surrounding concrete, showing only minor tarnishing. The site foreman immediately halted work and called the Harrison Police Department. Officers secured the area and contacted the Indiana State Police Forensics Unit. By evening, news of the discovery reached Agent Daniel Torres, who had taken over Amelia's case file the year before. The bracelet matched the description Amelia Foster had given in 2007, a birthday gift for Amelia's 9th birthday, purchased from a local jewelry store, engraved on the clasp with her initials AF, and featuring the signature star charm she had chosen herself because it reminded her of the night sky. Forensic technicians carefully extracted the item and transported it to the state lab. DNA analysis confirmed the presence of Amelia's genetic material on the inner surface of the band. Trace amounts of concrete dust consistent with the mill's basement floor adhered to the links. The discovery marked the first physical evidence in nearly a decade that directly tied to Amelia's disappearance. Agent Torres drove to Willowdale the next morning to inform the Fosters in person. Elena's hands trembled as she held a photograph of the recovered bracelet. Thomas asked practical questions about the lab results, his voice steady but quiet. Both expressed a mixture of renewed hope and dread, hope that answers might finally come, dread that those answers would confirm what they had long feared. The mill, originally built in 1958, had housed a clothing manufacturer until its closure. Property records showed it had been owned by Riverside Holdings, a real estate company that filed for bankruptcy in 2009. Between 2006 and 2009, the building had sat vacant except for occasional security patrols and minor maintenance to prevent vandalism. Investigators compiled a list of every individual with documented access during that window. Former security contractors, utility workers who performed meter readings, real estate agents who had shown the property to prospective buyers, and city code enforcement officers who conducted periodic inspections. The list totaled 18 names. Background checks began immediately. Alibis from 2007 were re-verified where possible. Most individuals had moved on, some out of state, a few deceased. Interviews proceeded methodically. One name drew particular attention: Victor Harlan, then 48, now 57. Harlan had worked as a part-time security contractor for Riverside Holdings from 2005 to 2008. His duties included monthly walkthroughs of several vacant properties, including the Harrison Mill. Payroll records placed him on site at least 6 times in late 2006 and early 2007. Further checks revealed Harlan had faced serious financial difficulties in 2006 to 2007, foreclosure on his home, substantial credit card debt, and the dissolution of his second marriage. He had no prior criminal record involving children, but his unstable circumstances during the exact period raised questions. Harlan had relocated to southern Illinois in 2011, working as a night watchman at a storage facility. When contacted by phone, he agreed to a voluntary interview and drove to Indiana 2 days later. He met Agent Torres and state detectives at the Harrison police station. Harlan described his routine patrols as brief, checking doors, windows, and utilities, rarely entering basements unless a leak was reported. He claimed no specific memory of the mill basement in late 2006 or early 2007, attributing the gap to the passage of time and the number of properties he covered. Investigators noted inconsistencies. He recalled details about other sites from the same period, but drew blanks on the mill. Building logs required contractors to inspect all levels, including basements, and initial each checklist. Harlan's signatures appeared on several forms dated October through December 2006. A search warrant was obtained for his current residence and vehicle. The initial search yielded no direct evidence, no clothing, no photographs, no items belonging to Amelia. However, technicians recovered dust samples from an old toolbox in his garage that, under microscopic analysis, contained traces of the same aggregate mix used in the mill's basement floor repairs. Confronted with the dust evidence, Harlan maintained he must have picked it up during legitimate patrols. He agreed to a polygraph. Results showed elevated responses when asked about children in the mill basement, but remained inconclusive. The mill itself became the focus of intensive examination. Forensic archaeologists oversaw the careful removal of the remaining basement slab section by section. Every bucket of broken concrete and underlying soil was sifted. The process took 3 weeks and involved heavy equipment operating under tents to preserve potential trace evidence. No additional items linked to Amelia were found. No clothing, no backpack, no further jewelry. Soil analysis dated the concrete pour to late 2006, consistent with minor repair records filed by Riverside Holdings to address cracking after a harsh freeze. Those repair records proved crucial. A small local contractor, Harrison Concrete Services, now defunct, had been hired for the job in November 2006. Invoices listed 2 workers assigned to the mill basement, the company owner and Victor Harlan, who had moonlighted for extra income during his financial troubles. Harlan's presence in the basement during the exact period when the bracelet could have been placed was now documented beyond his own signed logs. Agent Torres requested a second interview. Harlan arrived with an attorney and declined to answer further questions. Surveillance was increased, but without additional physical evidence, options remained limited. The discovery reinvigorated public interest. Local media ran front-page stories about the bracelet find. National cold case programs picked up the development, airing segments that included interviews with retired Agent Bennett and updated age-progressed images. The Fosters returned to Willowdale for the first time in several years, meeting with investigators and walking the mill site from a distance. They issued a short statement thanking law enforcement for their continued efforts and asking the public to come forward with any memory, no matter how small, from 2006-2007. Community response echoed the early days. Blue ribbons reappeared on doors and fences. The reward fund, dormant for years, received fresh donations that pushed it past $40,000. Investigators expanded the access list review to include informal visitors, teenagers known to explore abandoned buildings, homeless individuals who might have sought shelter, even former employees who retained keys. Each lead was pursued. By late summer 2016, the mill excavation concluded without further discoveries. The site was released back to the developer, who postponed renovation out of respect. The bracelet remained in evidence storage, its tiny star charm a silent reminder that Amelia's story was far from over. Attention refocused on Victor Harlan. His financial records from 2006 were subpoenaed, revealing cash withdrawals and payments that placed him in the Willowdale area multiple times in the weeks before October 12th. Cell tower data no longer existed, but fuel receipts and bank statements built a pattern of unexplained travel. Harlan's attorney advised limited cooperation. Surveillance continued, watching for any sign he might lead investigators to additional evidence. 9 years of silence had been broken by a single piece of jewelry buried beneath concrete. The question now was whether that breakthrough would be enough to unravel the rest of the mystery. The discovery of Amelia's bracelet shifted the investigation from quiet monitoring to focused pressure. Agent Daniel Torres assembled a joint task force with Indiana State Police and local departments to re-examine every thread connected to Victor Harlan. Surveillance on Harlan intensified through the summer and fall of 2016. Detectives watched his routines in southern Illinois, night shifts at the storage facility, weekend trips to a local bar, occasional visits to a sister in St. Louis. Nothing overtly suspicious emerged, no sudden moves, no attempts to dispose of property, but the pattern of a solitary life with few close ties fit the profile. In September, prosecutors secured a broader search warrant for Harlan's residence, vehicle, and the storage unit he rented under his name. A full evidence team executed the warrant on a crisp October morning while Harlan was at work. The house search produced boxes of old paperwork from his security contract days. Among tax records and pay stubs were folders containing newspaper clippings about missing children in central Indiana from 2006 to 2008. Several articles focused specifically on Amelia's case, including pieces published only in local print editions that had never appeared online. More disturbing were hand-drawn maps found in the same box. The maps covered Willowdale neighborhoods, with Amelia's walking route from school highlighted in red ink. Key points were annotated: the intersection where the trail ended, the Foster home, the elementary school entrance. Small notes indicated times, 3 p.m., 3:15 p.m., and sight lines from nearby parking spots. The most incriminating discovery came from a locked metal footlocker in the garage. Inside were 3 spiral notebooks filled with dated entries from 2006 and 2007. The handwriting, later confirmed by forensic experts as Harlan's, described daily observations in detached clinical language. Several pages from September and early October Tulis detailed repeated sightings of children on routine walks home from schools in the region. One recurring subject was labeled only as Star Girl. Entries noted her purple jacket, ponytail, and the exact path she took. One read, "Same time every day, waves at neighbor with roses, 2 blocks clear after corner. Mother watches only to the turn." An entry dated October 11, 2006. Star Girl again, backpack heavier today. Project, opportunity same, prepare. The next entry, October 13th. Taken care of, no issues, site ready, clean. Later pages referenced maintenance work at the mill and concrete repairs scheduled for November. One line simply stated, permanent placement, no trace left. Confronted with photographs of the evidence, Harlan requested his attorney and refused further comment. On November 3, 2016, he was arrested at his workplace and charged with kidnapping and murder. Extradition proceedings began immediately to bring him back to Indiana. News of the arrest spread quickly. Elena and Thomas Foster received the call from Agent Torres while at home. They sat together in the living room, listening as he outlined the evidence. Relief that a suspect was finally in custody mingled with fresh grief over what the notebooks implied. They issued no public statement, asking only for privacy as the legal process moved forward. Willowdale reacted with a complex mix of emotions. Residents who had lived through the original searches gathered in small groups, sharing memories of that October day. Blue ribbons already in place for the 9th anniversary took on new meaning. The Reward Fund Committee prepared to close its books, though no payout would be needed. Prosecutors built the case methodically. The bracelet's DNA and location tied directly to Harlan's documented presence during the concrete repairs. The maps demonstrated premeditation. The notebook entries, with their specific references to Amelia's habits and appearance, provided chilling insight into planning and execution. Defense attorneys argued the evidence was circumstantial. The clippings could reflect ordinary interest in a local case. The maps might have been drawn later out of curiosity, and the notebook entries could be interpreted as fictional writing or unrelated notes. They challenged the chain of custody on items stored for years and questioned whether financial stress alone proved motive. Harlan pleaded not guilty at arraignment. Bail was denied due to flight risk and the severity of charges. He was held in a county facility awaiting trial. Pre-trial preparations stretched into 2017 and 2018. Motions were filed over admissibility of the notebooks, whether the cryptic language constituted confession or mere fantasy. Forensic linguists analyzed phrasing patterns. Handwriting experts testified in hearings that the journals were unquestionably Harlan's. Witnesses from 2006-2007 were relocated and re-interviewed. A former co-worker at the security company recalled Harlan asking about vacant properties with basements suitable for storage projects. Another remembered him borrowing a company van on several afternoons without logging the mileage. The case drew national attention as a textbook example of cold case revival through physical evidence and meticulous records review. Documentaries revisited the story, interviewing Agent Torres and retired investigators about the breakthrough. The Fosters attended key hearings but avoided media. They met privately with prosecutors, reviewing evidence photographs only when necessary. The notebooks were the hardest. Seeing Amelia reduced to coded observations felt like losing her all over again. Jury selection began in early 2019. The trial date was set for September, 12 years after Amelia's disappearance. As the process moved forward, the town prepared for closure of a kind it had both longed for and dreaded. The evidence against Victor Harlan appeared, overwhelming, but the final verdict remained in the hands of 12 strangers who would hear the full story for the first time. The web that had stayed hidden for so long had finally been pulled tight.